The chandeliers blaze. Her veil trails behind her as she walks down the marble aisle, her heart still trembling with the echo of his promise the night before. I will love you forever. But as she reaches him, he takes her hand, only to let it go. His voice cuts the silence like a blade. This union is broken. Gasps ripple through the hall. The crowd gasps. Laughter erupts. Her world collapses. She could not see it. The flicker of pain in his eyes that betrays the lie. The secret he dares not speak.
The bells of the cathedral tolled in the distance, soft and silvery, rolling over the rooftops of a city gilded by autumn light. For most, the sound was nothing more than a reminder of prayer or passing time. But for Leanne, each chime seemed to echo her heartbeat, counting down the days, the hours, the fragile moments until her entire life changed. She drew the curtains of her chamber aside, staring out over the mist that clung to the noble quarter. Carriages rattled on cobbled streets below, their painted crests flashing in the sun like polished jewels. This was the world she had been born into, yet never fully allowed to belong to. Her family had once carried a name spoken with reverence. Now that name was a whisper, a faded echo, a memory the wealthy sneered at when she passed. Their fortune was gone, squandered in debts and wars not of her making. Their estate was crumbling brick and empty rooms. Still, she bore the weight of what was left, her younger siblings who looked to her with hungry eyes, who clung to her skirts for comfort when the cupboards were bare. Every choice she made was not for herself, but for them. And then came Jordan. The first time she had met him, she hadn't understood why the hall grew silent at his entrance. He carried himself with the easy command of a man who knew he was both feared and envied. Whispers had trailed him. The Duke with the untouchable heart, the man courted by every ambitious family and yet claimed by none. But when his gaze fell upon her, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. His amber-brown eyes had held hers, as if she were not some forgotten daughter of a ruined house, but a woman worth the envy of queens. Since that night, he had made his intentions known with startling clarity. He had sought her hand despite her family's disgrace. He had spoken to her with a gentleness that no one had ever afforded her. He had promised in words that sounded less like courtly oaths and more like a vow wrung from his very soul that he would fight anyone who dared to stand between them. And Leanne believed him. She believed because when he spoke, the ache of shame in her chest eased. She believed because when his hand brushed hers in stolen moments, she felt seen, chosen, cherished in a way she had never thought possible. It was more than a proposal, it was salvation. She sat now before the cracked mirror in her chamber, fingers threading through the worn fabric of her gown, and let herself dream. If I am his Duchess, my siblings will never go hungry. No one will laugh at us again. They will have tutors and warmth and safety. And I will have love. Yet even as she shaped the image of that perfect life in her mind, the shadows of the hallways whispered otherwise. Servants carried gossip like embers, voices low when she passed. Strange choice, isn't it? A duke of his station, with her. Another muttered, "There are families who will not forgive this match. Old wounds, you know. Old rivalries." She tried to shake it off, but unease stirred within her. Still, Jordan's hand in hers steadied her each time. The last evening before the banns were to be read, they walked through the overgrown gardens of his estate. Lanterns burned low, casting golden light on the marble statues that had seen centuries of lovers and wars. Leanne's heart trembled with the beauty of it. "You walk as though you do not believe this will be yours," Jordan murmured, his arm brushing hers. "I suppose part of me is afraid," she confessed softly, staring at the roses that clawed their way up broken stone. "Afraid that the world will wake me from this dream, that they'll remind me who I am and tell me I don't belong here." He stopped, turning her toward him with deliberate tenderness. "You belong nowhere but with me, and if anyone dares speak otherwise, they will find me standing in their way." Her breath caught. He wasn't smiling when he said it. He was solemn, fierce, as though he had already measured the cost and was ready to pay it. And then softer, as though speaking a vow meant only for her, He whispered, "I will love you forever, Leanne, until my last breath and beyond." Before she could answer, his mouth claimed hers in a kiss that left no room for doubt, passionate and consuming, stealing every protest and replacing it with fire. She clung to him as though the world itself might fall away, and for that heartbeat in time she believed it truly could not touch them. In that moment a fragile seed of faith grew inside her. That love could truly defy the cruel arithmetic of power and pride. As they returned inside, laughter spilled from the banquet hall where nobles toasted their future. But behind the glittering smiles not every face shone with joy. She noticed it, sharp eyes watching, whispers coiling like smoke. Even then, she dismissed it as envy. But somewhere deep in her chest a flicker of dread stirred. That night, as she lay awake, her mind chased questions she could not name aloud. Why does he risk so much for me? What storms wait beyond tomorrow's vows? She pressed her palm over her heart, willing the fear to settle. No matter the whispers, no matter the shadows, tomorrow will be mine. And yet, as dawn began to creep through her window, she could not shake the feeling that fate was already moving against her. Have you ever felt on the brink of everything you ever wanted, only to fear it could be stolen away at the last moment? Comment below. Would you trust Jordan's promise, or would the whispers of the court make you doubt him? The cathedral rose before her like a vision carved from heaven itself, its spires cutting into the pale morning sky, its stained glass windows blazing with the light of countless candles inside. Bells rang again, solemn and triumphant, a chorus that seemed to call her forward, to remind her that this was no dream. This was her wedding day. Leanne's breath trembled as she stepped from the carriage, her gown spilling around her like waves of ivory silk. The chill of early air kissed her cheeks, but warmth pulsed within her veins. All her fears, all the years of shame and whispers, felt suddenly behind her. Today, she would no longer be the forgotten daughter of a ruined house. Today, she would be his. Inside, the cathedral gleamed like a jewel. Chandeliers blazed with fire, dripping crystal light across marble floors and polished pews. Nobles in their finery filled every seat, the air thick with perfume and power. The hush that fell as she entered was absolute, the sound of her footsteps echoing like a drumbeat through the cavernous hall. Her eyes sought him immediately. Jordan, the Duke, her love. He stood at the altar, tall and unyielding, his shoulders squared beneath black and silver robes, his gaze locked on hers. The sight of him unraveled every knot in her chest. His expression was unreadable, yes, but she had seen the softness in those eyes, had felt the gentleness of his hand. She told herself she knew the truth that no one else could see, that beneath his polished armor of command, his heart was hers. Step by trembling step, she walked the length of the aisle. Each pace seemed to draw her closer, not only to him but to the life she had dared to dream. Behind her, she felt the eyes of every rival, every whisperer who had called her unworthy. Ahead, she felt salvation. Her siblings, seated near the front, leaned forward, their faces alight with hope. They were dressed in clothes finer than they had worn in years, and for once, they did not look hungry or forgotten. They looked like children with a future. The priest's voice rose, solemn and steady, speaking words of union, of vows yet to be spoken. She lifted her chin, her lips parting to answer when the moment came. But then it happened. Jordan's hand slipped from hers. It was subtle at first, a shift so small she thought she imagined it, but then his grip fell away entirely, his palm leaving her own cold and empty. Her breath hitched. She looked up at him, searching for reassurance. But the man she saw now was not the Jordan who had kissed her in the gardens, not the man who had whispered forever into her mouth. This Jordan's eyes were steel. His voice, when it came, was sharp and merciless, cutting through the silence like a blade. This union cannot stand. The words echoed through the cathedral, bouncing off walls, spilling into every corner. Leanne froze. Surely she had misheard. Surely he would explain. But he turned away from her, his jaw tight, his gaze sweeping over the watching lords and ladies as though she were nothing. Gasps erupted, followed by whispers, then a ripple of laughter, cruel, mocking, triumphant. She thought she could rise above her station. Did you see her face? A ruined family, humiliated once more. Her cheeks burned, her body rooted to the marble floor. She could not move, could not breathe. Her siblings clutched each other, horror dawning in their young eyes. Everything she had promised them, everything she had sacrificed for this moment shattered in a heartbeat. The priest faltered, his voice breaking off mid-verse. Silence followed, the kind that pressed heavy on her shoulders until she thought she might collapse beneath it. Jordan did not look at her, not once. She wanted to cry out, to demand an answer. She wanted to reach for him, to remind him of the vows he had spoken in private, of the love that had burned in his kiss. But her throat was locked, her voice stolen by devastation. The noble's laughter grew bolder. One woman leaned toward her companion and sneered. Did she truly believe he would marry her? Another said, "Foolish girl, she should have known her place." The weight of shame crushed her, heavier than any burden she had borne before. Every dream she had clung to disintegrated before her eyes. Her siblings' futures, once shining so brightly, now looked bleak again. No tutors, no warm beds, no safety. Only hunger and whispers and the knowledge that their sister had failed them. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not before the vultures who feasted on her pain. She lifted her chin, forcing her spine to straighten, but inside her heart was breaking, each beat jagged and raw. Jordan's voice, cold and final, sealed the humiliation. The marriage is dissolved. There will be no vows. The priest bowed his head in reluctant obedience. The congregation murmured, a storm of voices too loud to silence now. Leanne turned slowly, her gown dragging across the marble, her feet heavy as lead. Every step away from the altar felt like walking into exile. She could not look at her siblings, could not bear the thought of their disappointment. She could not look at him, at the man who had sworn to love her forever and had now left her to bleed beneath the eyes of the world. When the cathedral doors closed behind her, the sound was final, like the lid of a coffin sealing shut. Outside, the air was colder, harsher, as though even the sun refused to shine for her. For the first time since Jordan had entered her life, Leanne felt utterly alone, and in the silence of that moment, one truth seared itself into her heart. She had not only lost him, she had lost everything. Imagine standing at the altar, believing you had finally found salvation, only to be cast aside before the eyes of the world. Do you think Leanne should hate Jordan forever for this betrayal, or will you wait to see if there's more behind his cruelty? Comment your thoughts below. The days that followed the catastrophe at the cathedral unfolded like a nightmare that would not end. Leanne could not remember how she had left the marble floor where her world had shattered. She only remembered the sound of laughter, sharp as daggers, and the way her gown dragged across stone as though even the fabric mourned her disgrace. When she reached her family's crumbling estate, she locked herself in her chamber and wept until her throat was raw, until her tears carved trails across her cheeks that no gentle hand came to wipe away. Night after night she cried herself into uneasy sleep, only to wake to the memory of Jordan's hand slipping from hers. The betrayal played again and again in her mind, each time cutting deeper. Her sisters came with whispered words, pressing warm bread into her hands, begging her to eat. Her brothers hovered, faces tight with worry they could not hide. Even her weary aunt tried to console her, murmuring prayers over her door. But their efforts were fragile, thin veils that could not hide the truth. They were ruined once more. Worse than before. They had pinned their hopes on her marriage, had believed her love would restore their name and security. Instead, their disgrace had been made a spectacle before all of noble society. Everywhere, the whispers spread. She was foolish to think she belonged. He never truly wanted her. The Duke saw her for what she was at last. Each word filtered back to her, carried on the cruel tongues of servants and neighbours alike, and each one burrowed into her heart until it hardened into something darker. Hatred. She told herself she hated him now, hated Jordan for his false vows, for every soft word that had turned to ash, for every kiss that had been nothing but a lie. She pressed her fists to her chest, whispering through clenched teeth in the dark. I hate him. I hate him. I hate him. But still, in the hollow of night, when silence pressed too heavily against her, she remembered the way his lips had claimed hers in the garden. The vow whispered against her mouth, "I will love you forever." Those memories were harder to kill than anger, and they tore at her with cruel persistence. While she drowned in grief, the city turned its eyes to him. Jordan did not falter, at least not in the way the world could see. He returned to his estate as if the broken wedding had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. At council meetings, he was the same sharp duke, voice steady, presence commanding. His men asked him again and again why he had humiliated her so publicly, why he had chosen disgrace over alliance. Their voices ranged from curiosity to outrage, from loyalty to scorn, and always his answer was the same. I fell out of love with her. He said it with such cold conviction that even his closest advisers believed him. Some shook their heads, muttering about fickleness. Others laughed, saying they had known it would not last. A few, braver or more foolish than the rest, whispered that perhaps the Duke had grown wise in time, sparing himself from ruin. But behind the walls of his chambers, Jordan was not the same. At night, when the fire burned low and silence pressed close, he sat alone with a glass of untouched wine, staring into the flames until his vision blurred. The words he had spoken to his council echoed back at him. I fell out of love with her. Lies. Every syllable a lie. He could still see her standing in the cathedral, her eyes wide and shimmering, her lips parted in disbelief. He could still hear the sound of her heart breaking, though she had made no sound. That image haunted him, clawed at him, tore through his defenses until he thought he might go mad. He tried to hold himself steady, tried to bury himself in the endless demands of power and duty. But nothing silenced the memory of her touch, the way her hand had felt in his. Nothing dulled the bond that pulled at him still, as though some unseen thread tethered him to her no matter how far apart they drifted. He told himself it was necessary, that this distance was mercy, that letting her hate him would keep her safe. But even as he tried to cling to that, he could not quiet the voice inside him that whispered another truth. He loved her still. He always had. He always would. Days bled into weeks, and the city's whispers turned to certainty. The Duke had cast her aside, and the girl of the ruined house was nothing more than a faded curiosity. For Leanne, the humiliation hardened into armor, brittle though it was. She began to leave her chamber, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She said little, but her silence spoke of wounds that had not healed. And yet sometimes, when she walked through the gardens of her family's estate, she thought she felt eyes on her, watching, longing, invisible, but present. She shook it off as fancy, as the cruel trick of a heart that refused to die. Still, something lingered, an unfinished story, a truth untold. Because Jordan's mask, though flawless before the world, cracked in the privacy of his solitude. Each night, when sleep would not come, he whispered her name into the darkness, as though it could bring her back. Leanne. The pull was too strong. He told himself to stay away, to let her believe he was nothing but a liar, that her hatred for him would keep her safe. But deep down, he knew the truth. The bond between them would not break, and sooner or later, he would not be able to resist. Would you forgive someone who shattered you publicly if you had no explanation for their betrayal? Or is hatred the only shield the heart has left? Share your thoughts below. The storm between them should have ended with silence. Leanne had convinced herself that if she never saw him again, perhaps her heart would stop bleeding. Perhaps the memory of his betrayal would dull into something she could bear. She avoided the places where his name lingered, refused to acknowledge the whispers that still clung to her in the streets. But even hatred could not silence the pull that lived inside her. It coiled in her chest, unyielding, unbreakable. And one night, when the lamps burned low in her family's estate and her siblings finally slept, that pull came knocking at her door. She froze at the sound. The heavy thud reverberated through the worn wood, followed by the deep timbre of a voice she knew too well. Leanne. Her heart stuttered painfully in her chest. She rose, trembling, every instinct telling her not to answer. Yet her hand hovered over the latch all the same. When she opened it, there he was. Jordan, cloaked in shadow, his eyes burning with a torment that mirrored her own. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice sharp, though her strength wavered. "I couldn't stay away," he admitted, the words tumbling from him with raw honesty. "I've tried, gods know I've tried, but I can't breathe without seeing you." Her throat tightened, anger sparking to life again, desperate to shield her from the danger of his presence. "You humiliated me before the world. Do you think you can stand here now and—" "Please," he cut in, stepping forward but stopping just short of her touch. His voice dropped low, pleading. "Grant me a moment, an audience, and I will tell you why." Her fists curled at her sides. She wanted to slam the door, to let him suffer as she had suffered, but the anguish in his eyes stopped her. Against her better judgment, she nodded once. "Not here. Too many ears." They slipped into the garden, the night air cool and fragrant with wild jasmine that had long since overrun the stone arches. Moonlight spilled over broken statues, painting them both in silver. Leanne kept her arms crossed tightly over her chest, a barrier between them. Jordan stood opposite as though at confession, his hands clenched at his sides. "Speak then," she said, her voice hard. "Tell me why you ruined me." He inhaled, ragged and sharp, then reached into his coat. From it he pulled a folded parchment, the wax seal broken but still bearing the insignia of a man far greater than himself. "This arrived the morning of our wedding," he said, "and it left me no choice." Leanne's breath caught. She stared at the letter but did not reach for it. "What does it say?" His jaw tightened. "That if I married you, you would not live to see another sunrise." Her stomach hollowed, her breath faltering. "What?" It was no idle threat. His voice cracked. "The seal was from one whose armies dwarf my own, a man who could grind me, and you, into dust if I defied him." He stepped closer, desperation leaking into every word. "I knew if I took your hand at that altar, you would be marked for death before our vows were complete." Leanne shook her head, staggering back a step. "Why? Why would anyone want me dead?" He hesitated, then forced the truth out like a blade tearing free. "Because you are not who you think you are. You are the last surviving heir of a house destroyed long ago. You were hidden, adopted, raised under another name. But your blood is a threat to kingdoms." Her world tilted. She gripped the stone bench behind her to keep from collapsing. "That's impossible." "It is the truth." His eyes burned with anguish. "If we had married, if we had children, our bloodlines would unite, and together our heirs would hold a claim strong enough to challenge the throne itself. That is why they fear you. That is why they would rather see you dead than risk your survival." Leanne pressed her hand to her mouth, her chest heaving. She thought of every whisper, every sideways glance she had endured, every sneer of nobles who had insisted she did not belong. They knew. They had known all along. "And so you destroyed me," she whispered bitterly. "You chose their power over me. You chose to save yourself." His face twisted, pain stark in every line. "No," he rasped. "I chose to save you. I thought if you hated me, if you believed me false, they would no longer see you as a threat. I thought you would be safe." Tears blurred her vision, spilling hot and furious. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me, to my family? You let them laugh at me. You let them tear me apart." "I know," he said hoarsely, his voice breaking, "and it destroys me. I hear your sobs in my sleep. I see your face every time I close my eyes. I cannot undo what I did, but I cannot stop loving you. I never stopped. I never will." Silence fell, thick and trembling, broken only by her uneven breaths. She wanted to strike him, to scream, to collapse into his arms all at once. The fury in her chest warred with the bond that refused to die. He dropped to his knees before her, his hands trembling as he reached not to touch but to plead. "Hate me if you must, but let me fight for you. Let me stand with you. Alone I cannot face them. Together. Together. We might." Leanne's heart pounded, her anger flickering against the raw vulnerability in his words. She stared at him, the man who had broken her, the man who had knelt before her with all his pride stripped away. Her voice came low, steady, unyielding. "Then we fight, together. If they want me dead, let them come. But I will not cower, and I will not run." His head bowed, a shudder of relief coursing through him. When he looked up, his eyes shone with something fierce and unbreakable. "I swear to you," he said, voice reverent, "from this moment until my last breath, you will never stand alone again." The fury in her chest softened into something sharper, more dangerous. Resolve. Betrayal still scarred her, but beneath it burned a bond stronger than fear, stronger than shame. She reached for his hand. For the first time since the altar, their fingers twined, and neither pulled away. In the moonlit garden, heartbreak transformed into alliance, and hatred gave way to something far more powerful. Love that would defy kingdoms. If you were in Leanne's place, betrayed in public, yet given the truth in private, would you choose to forgive and fight beside him, or would you walk away forever? Share your thoughts below. The days after Jordan's confession were heavy with silence, but this silence was different. It was no longer the silence of grief or humiliation, but of thought, of questions that gnawed at Leanne's soul and would not leave her until she unearthed the truth. She had walked with him beneath the moonlight, listened to the words he had held back for weeks, felt her world crumble and reshape in the span of an hour. She was not who she thought she was. Her blood carried an inheritance older and more dangerous than she had ever imagined, and now she could no longer ignore it. The morning after, she sought the only people who might hold the missing pieces: her family. The crumbling manor that had been her cage of shame now felt like a vault of secrets. Leanne's steps echoed through its hollow corridors as she made her way to the parlour where her aunt sat with her brothers and sisters. The fire there burned low, casting flickering light across weary faces. They looked up as she entered, their eyes still heavy with sorrow, but hers no longer carried the emptiness of betrayal. They burned with demand. "Tell me the truth," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. Her aunt frowned, confusion knitting her brow. "Truth? Who am I?" Leanne's words sliced the air. "Not the name you gave me, not the ruined girl the court mocks. Who am I really?" Her siblings exchanged glances, fear in their eyes. The older ones shifted uncomfortably, while the youngest clung to each other in silence. Her aunt's face drained of colour. "I know," Leanne pressed, stepping forward, her voice rising. "Jordan told me. About a letter, about a threat, about the blood in my veins. Do not lie to me now. I have heard enough lies to last a lifetime." The room crackled with silence. At last, her aunt exhaled, the sound breaking like a dam. "We swore never to speak of it, to protect you." "Protect me?" Leanne's laugh was bitter. "By raising me in ignorance while the world sharpened its knives in the shadows." Her aunt's eyes shone with unshed tears. "What choice did we have? You were brought to me as an infant, swaddled in cloth that bore the crest of a house long destroyed. They said everyone had perished. But you—" Her voice broke. "You were the last. I could not abandon you, not when I had already lost so much. So I took you in, gave you our name, gave you a family. If the world knew who you truly were, they would have come for you long before now." Leanne's chest tightened. Part of her wanted to rage, to scream for the years stolen, for the humiliation she had endured without knowing why. But as she looked at the weary woman who had raised her, at the siblings who had never treated her as anything but their own, the anger faltered. "You lied," Leanne whispered, tears brimming. "But you loved me." Her aunt rose, taking her trembling hands. "We did what we could to keep you safe. If you hate us for it, then so be it. But we would do it again." Leanne closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. She pressed her forehead to her aunt's, drawing in the fragile warmth. "I don't hate you," she murmured. "I could never hate you. You saved me when no one else would." The bitterness that had threatened to consume her softened into something steadier, gratitude. The truth had cut deep, but it had not broken her. Instead, it anchored her resolve. She would not let their sacrifices be for nothing. That night, when Jordan returned, she was ready. They met in the garden again, cloaked by shadows. His face was taut with tension, but her eyes held fire. "They were right," she said. "Every word. My bloodline is real. My claim is real. And if that is what makes me a target, then so be it. I will not run from it. I will face it." His breath left him in a shudder, a flicker of relief breaking his rigid mask. "Then we fight together." And so they began. Jordan moved with calculated precision, reaching out to rival nobles, to houses long disgruntled with the man who had sent the threat. It was dangerous. Every invitation, every whispered word risked exposing them. He did not dare bring them to his grand estate in the capital. Too many eyes, too many spies. Instead, he chose neutral ground, an abandoned hunting lodge at the edge of the forest, a forgotten guild hall in the capital where men met under the guise of trade, even a candlelit chapel whose priest was loyal to him alone. There, by firelight and secrecy, he met them face to face. Some came cloaked, wary of being recognized. Some sent emissaries to test his sincerity. All came with suspicion in their eyes. But Jordan stood his ground, his voice steady, his resolve iron. And Leanne, though he had not wanted to risk her at first, joined him. At the beginning she sat quietly, her hands folded, enduring the skeptical stares of men who saw her as nothing more than the humiliated girl at the altar. One lord scoffed openly. "Why risk your house for her, Jordan? She has no power, no standing, no claim worth spilling blood." That was when Leanne spoke. Her voice did not tremble. She told them of her humiliation, of standing alone while the court laughed. She told them of the truth she had discovered, that her bloodline had been hidden, denied, nearly erased, and she told them that she would no longer cower. "I will not beg for your approval," she said, her eyes steady on the lord who mocked her. "I will fight with or without it. But know this. Kingdoms are not only built on blood, they are built on the courage of those who refuse to be silenced." The hall had gone silent. Jordan watched her with something like awe, realizing she had done what he could not. She had struck the hearts of those who doubted. An older widowed lady of rank, long ignored by councilmen, was the first to speak. "She has the bearing of a queen," she murmured. A younger lord, bitter from years of being slighted by their mutual enemy, leaned forward and pledged his support then and there. Slowly others followed, not because of Jordan's power, but because of Leanne's strength. From that night on, the whispers began to change. She was no longer only the girl who had been abandoned. She was becoming a woman others could not ignore. Their bond deepened in these secret gatherings. Between strategy and danger, their private moments burned hotter, fiercer. Each kiss was edged with desperation, each touch a vow that they would endure, that their love would not be broken again. Yet the closer they drew allies, the sharper the threats became. Shadows lingered at the edges of their estate. A warning etched in blood appeared on their garden gate. "Step aside, or the ground will drink yours." Jordan's jaw hardened, his grip on her hand tightening. But Leanne only lifted her chin higher. She was no longer the broken bride. She was becoming something far greater. "If you were Leanne, would you dare walk into secret councils where your very presence could spark betrayal? Or would you leave the fight to him alone? Share your thoughts?" The more their alliances grew, the more dangerous the shadows became. By now the court and everyone knows of the truth. Rivals know that their bond is not broken. And then, what had begun as veiled warnings and whispered threats soon turned into open strikes meant to break their resolve. It began with sabotage. Horses spooked in the night, their stables set ablaze by unseen hands. Supplies meant for Jordan's men vanished before reaching his estate. Stolen by raiders who disappeared into the woods with eerie precision, carriages overturned on roads that should have been safe, wheels hacked until they shattered. It was no longer rumor and menace. It was war in the shadows. But worse than fire and steel were the whispers. Servants carried tales of betrayal, of lords who had once pledged support, now wavering under the weight of fear. Word spread that Leanne herself was cursed, that her bloodline had brought nothing but ruin before and would again. Invitations to gatherings were rescinded, doors that had once opened in cautious welcome now slammed shut. And everywhere she walked, she felt eyes trailing her, measuring her worth against the cost of standing beside her. Then came the cruelest move yet, her siblings. It started with her youngest brother, who failed to return from a simple errand to the market. Panic ripped through the manor until a messenger arrived with a sealed note. A dangerous heir should not raise children as pawns. Perhaps it would be better if she had no family at all. Her hands shook as she read it aloud, her sisters crying, her aunt collapsing in despair. Jordan acted swiftly, his men scouring the city until her brother was found, shaken but unharmed, left tied to a post on the outskirts of town. It was a warning, nothing more. But Leanne knew the truth. They could take everything from her if she faltered. At court, the attacks turned from whispers to speeches. Nobles stood in gilded chambers and declared her a danger to peace, her very existence a threat to stability. Some demanded she be banished to a convent. Others called openly for her execution. "Why?" one lord sneered. "Should kingdoms tremble over a girl whose only claim is a bloodline already buried? Better to end the matter cleanly than risk war." The pressure mounted against Jordan. They told him he must renounce her once more, must swear before the crown that he would never claim her. If he did, perhaps he could keep his lands, his title, his armies. If not, he risked open rebellion. Leanne stood behind him in those halls, her chin high, her heart breaking. She watched as he listened, silent, his jaw clenched. She half expected him to crumble again, to cast her aside, to save himself. She told herself she would not weep this time if he did, but when he spoke, his voice shook the chamber. "You ask me to renounce the woman who is my heart," he said, his tone like steel. "You ask me to trade love for power, as though one is worth more than the other. Hear me now, I would rather lose every acre, every coin, every ounce of influence than live without her. She is worth more than kingdoms. She is worth everything." Gasps rippled through the nobles. Some turned their heads in disgust, others murmured, unnerved by his defiance. But Leanne felt tears sting her eyes, not of pain, but of something she had not felt since the day of the altar. Hope. Yet hope was fragile, and the attacks grew bolder. Late one evening, after a council meeting had left Jordan seething with barely leashed fury, Leanne wandered the manor gardens, needing air. The moonlight bathed the roses in silver, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air. She paused by the fountain, her reflection trembling in the water. Her mind churned with doubts. Was she worth this cost? Was her blood worth the danger pressing in on them? Was she selfish for letting him fight for her when she brought only peril? Her chest tightened, tears brimming. She whispered into the night, "If I were gone, perhaps he would be free." "Don't you dare," a voice answered from the shadows. She spun, her breath catching. Jordan stepped forward, his eyes blazing, his face carved with determination. "Don't you dare think that," he growled, his voice rough with emotion. He reached for her, gripping her hands tight. "You are not a burden. You are not a cost. You are everything. If I must lose crowns and titles to keep you, I will. If I must fight the world, I will. But don't you ever believe I'd be freer without you. Without you, I am nothing." Her tears fell freely now, and she leaned into him, their foreheads pressed together, their breaths mingling. In his embrace, her doubts ebbed, replaced by a fierce, fragile certainty. Whatever storms raged, they would weather them side by side. But even love could not shield them from the enemy's hand. The attempt came swiftly, without warning. They were returning from a clandestine meeting with a sympathetic noble when their carriage wheels locked strangely on the road. Before Jordan could react, shadows leapt from the tree line. Steel flashed. Arrows whistled. The guards scrambled, clashing against figures cloaked in black. "Leanne!" Jordan roared, shielding her as a blade slashed toward the window. The carriage splintered, wood shattering around them. He dragged her out, sword already in hand, fury blazing in his eyes. But the assassins had not come for him. Their eyes sought her. She barely had time to scream before one lunged, dagger raised high. Jordan struck the man down, but another was already behind her. Pain seared across her arm as the blade grazed her, crimson blooming against her gown. The world tilted, her knees buckling. Jordan's roar shook the night. He fought like a man possessed, cutting down those who dared come near her. Blood slicked the ground, the clash of steel echoing through the trees. When the last attacker fell, silence crashed down. Jordan dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he pressed against the wound. "Stay with me," he begged, his voice breaking. "Stay with me, Leanne." Her vision blurred, darkness clawing at the edges. She saw his face above hers, desperate, anguished, filled with love so raw it hurt to look at. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped. "Jordan." Then the darkness swallowed her. "If you were in Leanne's place, would you believe his vow that love is worth more than kingdoms, or would the weight of danger make you walk away to protect him? Share your thoughts." The night of the attack lingered in Leanne's memory as a blur of blood and fire, but the echo of Jordan's voice was carved into her very soul. "Stay with me." When she opened her eyes days later, weak but alive, she saw him slumped in a chair at her bedside, dark circles beneath his eyes, his hand clasped around hers as though letting go would mean losing her forever. "You nearly left me," he whispered when she stirred, his voice hoarse, breaking with the exhaustion of sleepless nights. "Never do that again." Her heart ached as she squeezed his hand. "I'm not so easily rid of," she said softly, and in her smile there was fire. For if she had survived the assassin's blade, then surely it meant her fate was not to vanish into silence. Surely it meant she was meant to stand and fight. And so Jordan made his gamble. The court convened weeks later in the Great Hall, a vast chamber with marble columns rising like trees of stone, banners hanging heavy with the weight of lineage and pride. The air reeked of politics, of perfumes masking rot, of whispers sharpened into daggers. Nobles filled the benches, their eyes glittering with curiosity and scorn. Rumours had spread like wildfire since the attempt on Leanne's life. Some claimed she had already fled the city, others claimed she was dead. Few expected her to stand at Jordan's side that day. But when the Duke strode into the chamber, cloak flowing, his jaw set like carved stone, she was there, her hand in his, her step steady, though her body still bore the faint memory of pain. Gasps swept through the court, murmurs rose, spreading like ripples. She dares return. Foolish girl, she seeks death. No, look at her. She does not tremble. Jordan took his place at the centre of the hall. His voice carried, deep and resonant, cutting through the murmurs. "You have whispered in corners long enough. You have threatened, you have plotted, you have struck from the shadows, no more." His eyes swept the chamber, burning with defiance. "Today, I call upon all who claim loyalty to crown and kingdom to show themselves. Will you stand for tyranny and fear, or will you stand with me, for freedom, for truth, for her?" Every head turned toward Leanne. Her pulse thundered, but she did not falter. She stepped forward, the torchlight catching her gown, her face pale but unshaken. She did not wait for Jordan to speak for her. Instead, her voice rang clear, stronger than she ever thought possible. "I am Leanne, daughter not of the house you thought forgotten, but of a bloodline you tried to erase. For years I lived in silence, mocked, humiliated, cast aside as if I were nothing. But I am still here, and I will no longer cower. If you fear my blood, it is because you know it carries power you cannot crush. If you seek my death, then you will find me unyielding. I will not vanish. I will not be silenced." A stunned hush fell over the court. Then voices rose at once, some jeering, some rallying. "She is dangerous. She is brave. Kill her before she brings war. She speaks truth. Why should we kneel to fear?" The chamber fractured, alliances shifting in the span of breaths. Some nobles, emboldened by her courage, rose to their feet and declared support for Jordan openly, their voices carrying over the din. Others whispered to their neighbours, their eyes calculating, already plotting against her. For every ally gained, an enemy sharpened their blade. Jordan reached for her hand again, grounding her. His eyes burned with pride, with fierce devotion. "You see them?" he murmured low enough only she could hear. "You shake kingdoms just by speaking. You are not a danger. You are destiny." Her breath caught, her chest tightening at the intensity in his gaze. And you? She whispered back. I am yours, he said. No hesitation, no mask. In life, in death, in ruin or victory, always yours. The voices around them rose into chaos, accusations, threats, cries of loyalty and betrayal. And in the heart of it, Jordan pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Not a stolen kiss in shadow, not a whispered vow in secret, but a kiss before the court, before their enemies, before the world. Gasps erupted, scandal rippling through the chamber. Some shouted in outrage, others cheered, but none could deny what they had witnessed. The Duke and the lost heir, no longer bound by secrecy but by open defiance. Their love was no longer hidden, it was their weapon. Later, when the chamber had emptied and the torches guttered low, they remained together in the silence. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heart. They will come for us harder now, she murmured. Yes, he said, his voice steady, but they will find us ready. Her hand slid into his, their fingers interlacing, strong and unbreakable. We fight together. Together, he echoed, sealing the vow. And though the storm gathered, though enemies watched with sharpened knives, Leanne no longer feared the darkness, for she had stepped into the light, and beside her stood the only man who had ever seen her as more than her shame. Whatever price the world demanded, they would pay it together. But outside the walls of the chamber, in the unseen corners of power, Idris, a high lord of the council who has always been against the reunion, the one who sent the letter, smiled. For love had given them strength, but also made them vulnerable. And the storm was only beginning. Would you have dared what Leanne did, standing before the court, declaring your bloodline and sealing your fate with a kiss of defiance? Or would silence have been safer? Share your thoughts. The days that followed their public defiance were like the sharp edge of a blade, every moment humming with the promise of blood. Rumours stormed through the city, spreading faster than fire in a dry field. Some claimed the Duke had gone mad, bewitched by a woman whose blood threatened to undo centuries of order. Others whispered of courage, of a love so fierce it dared kingdoms to challenge it. But beneath all of it lurked one truth. Idris could no longer sit in silence. He had sent threats, sent assassins, poisoned words into the ears of nobles. None of it had broken them. Now, with Jordan's alliances growing, with Leanne herself stepping into the light, he was left with two choices: crush them openly, or lose his stranglehold forever. The summons arrived at dawn, carried by a trembling messenger whose face was pale with fear. The great council would meet. Every house, every noble, every hand of power would gather under one roof. And there the final confrontation would decide whether Leanne lived or died. The hall was vast, the banners of noble houses draped high across stone pillars. At the far end of the chamber, Idris stood, a man wrapped in wealth and command, flanked by guards whose armor gleamed. His presence was like a shadow cast across fire, his eyes cold, calculating, measuring every soul in the room. Jordan entered first, his stride deliberate, his cloak sweeping behind him like the wings of a hawk. At his side walked Leanne, no longer cloaked in shame but dressed in silver and deep crimson, colours that declared not humility, but strength. Her chin was high, her eyes unflinching, her every step a defiance against the chains once placed upon her. Gasps rippled through the court. Some rose in approval, others sneered, but none could deny the sight. The Duke and the woman he had once humiliated now stood united, hand in hand, unbreakable. Idris' voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "You dare stand here, after I warned you what your union would bring?" Jordan's reply was calm, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "We do not bow to threats, not yours, not anyone's." Idris' lip curled. "You think love will shield you from the ruin that follows? You think your alliances will stand when armies march? Do you truly believe your defiance will not end in ash?" Leanne stepped forward then, her voice clear, echoing off the stone. "No, I do not believe it will end in ash. I believe it will end here, with you." Murmurs surged like a tide. nobles leaning forward, hearts thundering as they sensed the shift in the air. Then the walls shook with the sound of steel. For as Leanne spoke, Jordan's allies made themselves known. One by one, nobles rose from their seats, stepping into the light. Lords and ladies who had pledged in whispers now declared openly, their voices ringing across the hall. "You will not touch her. She is under our protection. We stand with them." The chamber swelled with power, banners unfurling, the weight of unity pressing like a storm against Idris. He had come prepared to corner them, to strip them down until they were helpless. Instead, he found himself surrounded, outnumbered, his enemies bolder than he had ever dared imagine. Jordan turned, his voice steady as stone. "You thought threats would silence us. You thought whispers would divide us, but your cruelty has done nothing but strengthen the bonds you sought to sever. Look around you. Every house that rises now does so because they are done living in fear. Your reign of shadows is over." Idris' face twisted with fury. He stepped forward, his cloak snapping behind him like the wings of a raven. "You cannot outmatch me. Even now I could summon forces to break you." "Try," Jordan said, his voice low, dangerous, "and watch this court burn into war. Watch kingdoms unravel, not because of her, but because of your pride." The silence that followed was suffocating. Idris' eyes raked the chamber, calculating, weighing. He saw the steel in Jordan's gaze, the fire in Leanne's, the nobles who now stood united, forming a wall too high, too unyielding for even him to breach. He could crush them, yes, but at the cost of everything he had clawed to build, and he would not gamble his empire on a battle he could not win. The reversal came not with blood, but with retreat. Idris' lips curled into a bitter smile. "Very well. If the court wishes to tether itself to danger, let it." He stepped back, his voice dripping with venom. "But do not mistake my patience for mercy. One day, your love will cost you more than you can bear." With a flick of his cloak, he turned and strode from the hall, his guards following like shadows torn from light. The door slammed shut behind him, the echo ringing like the final toll of a bell. And just like that, silence shifted into something else. Victory. The nobles erupted, some in cheers, some in outrage, but all acknowledging what had happened. Idris had been forced to yield. Jordan's shoulders loosened, but his hand on Leanne's never wavered. He turned to her, his eyes burning not with triumph for himself, but for her. "Do you see?" he whispered fiercely. "They tried to bury you, to mock you, to strip you of everything. But you stood, and they bowed." Her throat tightened as tears pricked her eyes. The girl who had once trembled beneath whispers, who had once walked down an aisle trembling with hope only to be shattered, she was gone. In her place stood a woman forged in fire, unyielding, unbroken. "No," she said softly, lifting her chin, her eyes glistening with pride. "We stood, together." Before the court, before allies and enemies alike, he drew her into his arms once more. His lips brushed hers, not in defiance now, but in triumph. "I swear to you," he murmured against her mouth, "never again will you stand alone. Not in battle, not in love, not in life. If the world rises against us, it will find me at your side." "And I swear," she whispered back, fierce and certain, "never again will you carry the weight alone. Whatever storms come, we will bear them together." The court watched as their kiss sealed not just a vow of love, but a vow of power, a vow of unity that no chain of fear could shatter. The girl mocked at the altar was gone. The woman who stood now was victory itself. If you were in Leanne's place, mocked, threatened, nearly killed, would you have had the courage to stand before the court and defy a tyrant, or would you have chosen safety over love? Share your thoughts. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered like thunder far away. For days the city buzzed with the memory of that council. How Idris, the man whose armies had cowed kingdoms, had been forced to retreat before the defiance of a duke, and the lost heir he had tried to erase. Some called it madness, some called it a miracle. All agreed it had changed the balance of power forever. But for Leanne, victory was not measured in whispers of court, or the shifting tides of noble houses. It was in the quiet moments that followed, the soft light of dawn spilling into her chamber as she rose no longer hollow with grief, the laughter of her siblings echoing in the halls of their once ruined estate, the weight of Jordan's hand warm in hers whenever doubt threatened to return. Her first step was to face her family. She returned to the manor where she had hidden in shame after the cathedral, her heart hammering as she entered the parlour. Her brothers and sisters looked up at her with wide eyes, unsure, torn between pride and fear. They had endured so much, her humiliation, the threats, the fear of losing her. She stood before them now, not as the broken bride they had once tried to comfort, but as the woman who had defied Idris himself. Tears filled her aunt's eyes as she rose, hands trembling. "We feared we had failed you." Leanne shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me love when the world would have left me to die. That was not failure. That was salvation." Her younger sister rushed forward, clutching at her skirts. "They call us honored now," she whispered. "They say our name is spoken with respect again." Leanne knelt, pulling the child close, her chest aching with relief. "Then hold your head high. You are worthy of it. We all are." For the first time in years, the household did not feel like a ruin weighed down by loss. It felt alive, whole, restored. But her greatest healing came in Jordan. He had been her betrayer, her heartbreak, her shield, her ally, her lover. He had been the man who let her fall and the man who caught her again when the world tried to destroy her. Now he was simply hers. Their nights were no longer shadowed by secrecy or fear. In the quiet hours, when torches guttered low and the world was hushed, he kissed her with a hunger that spoke of all the time they had lost, of vows broken and remade in fire. His hands traced her as though memorizing every inch, as though anchoring himself to the only truth that had survived every lie. They belonged to one another. "I thought I lost you," he whispered one night, his forehead pressed to hers. "At the altar, in the carriage. Every time Idris tried to tear you from me, I thought I would break. But you're still here, you're mine." Leanne's fingers tightened in his hair, her breath trembling against his lips. "Not yours alone," she murmured, eyes burning with devotion. "We are each other's. You carry me, and I carry you. That is how we survived. That is how we will always survive." And when he kissed her again, it was not desperation, not defiance. It was eternity. Weeks later, they returned to the hall where it had all begun. The same marble floor that had echoed with her disgrace, the same chandeliers that had burned like fire over her humiliation, now shone with a different light. The banners of allied houses hung high, the nobles who had once mocked her, now rising to bow their heads as she entered. She walked not in a gown of trembling hope, but in the robes of a duchess, her hand clasped firmly in Jordan's. Gasps rippled through the chamber, but they were not cruel now. They were reverent. Whispers followed her, but no longer whispers of laughter. She is the one who stood against Idris. She is the one who defied death itself. She is the duchess who carries a queen's fire. She felt the weight of their stares, but it no longer crushed her. It lifted her. For every step she took down that hall, she walked not as the girl who had been broken, but as the woman who had remade herself from ash. Jordan paused at her side, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Do you feel it? How they look at you now?" "Yes," she said softly. Her lips curved into a smile both fierce and tender. "But I don't walk for them. I walk for us." He pressed a kiss to her hand, a gesture so simple yet more powerful than crowns and armies. "Then let us never walk apart again." And so their vow was remade, not in secret, not in fear, but in the heart of the very hall that had once seen her destroyed. "I swear," Jordan said before all, his voice unshakable, "that she will never stand alone again. Not in love, not in battle, not in life. She is mine, and I am hers, until my last breath." Leanne turned, her eyes glistening, her own voice steady with the fire of everything they had endured. "And I swear I will never let him bear the weight alone. His fight is mine, his burden mine, his triumph mine. Together we will never bow." The hall erupted, not with mockery, not with venom, but with applause, with shouts of loyalty, with the thunder of approval that shook the very stones. Idris' shadow lingered still, somewhere beyond those walls, but for now he was nothing but silence. It was not his name that carried through the court that day, but hers, Leanne. The forgotten girl who had been mocked at the altar was gone. In her place stood a duchess who had faced down kings, who had turned whispers of fear into whispers of respect, who had proven herself worthy not only of love, but of destiny. The final image was etched into the hearts of all who witnessed it. Leanne and Jordan, standing hand in hand, their silhouettes framed beneath the chandeliers that once blazed upon her humiliation. But now those lights did not mock, they crowned, and as the chamber bowed to them, as allies pledged their faith and enemies slunk back into shadows, one truth became undeniable. Together, they were unshakable. Would you have had the strength to return to the very hall where you were once humiliated and stand there in triumph? Or would the scars of betrayal have kept you away forever? Share your thoughts